iOS devices come in many different shapes and sizes. When you design an iOS application, it's important to develop an app that will scale properly on each device. You can do that using something called auto layout constraints. Let's take a look at how those work. So I have my text view on the screen, and it's not quite lining up with this guy at the bottom here, this toolbar. So I'm going to click and drag this bottom center handle and just snap it right there. So everything's kind of snapped into place. If I were to view this on a different device, here it says view as iPhone 11. If I click that and I take a look at an older device, so I'm going to click this drop down where it says device. Now if you're on a bigger screen, you might not see a drop down, it might just be a list of devices from left to right. So click there and then choose the appropriate device. I'm going to go way back to the 4S. Notice that text view is way too big. So what we want is a user interface that scales properly. So the text field won't be so big, and this toolbar, it might be hard to see on my screen, but maybe on your screen you can see that it's not touching the bottom of the screen. So we want to snap these elements to the edges of the screen and to each other. So let's go back to the iPhone 11 Pro Max. And here what I'm going to do with this text view selected, I'm going to click this button right here. This is the two lines on the left and the square on the right. Looks like a little bit of a spaceship. Click that button to add new constraints. And then what we want to do is add constraints of 0 all the way around. So it's going to hug the top left, and then bottom, instead of hugging the edge of the screen, it's going to hug the object below it. So that's what it says right here, spacing to nearest neighbor. So when there's nothing on the left, its nearest neighbor is the edge of the device. So all we need to do here, we already have zeros in all these fields, so just click these dotted red lines and they'll see that they become solid, and that's going to create these constraints. Leave constrain to margins unchecked. We don't want to constrain the width and height because we don't want this to be a specific width and height. We want it to be connected to the edges of the screen and the toolbar at the bottom. So with that set, hit the Add 4 Constraints button here. Note that the constraints will not be added until you hit that button. Now select the toolbar at the bottom. Hit that same button to add new constraints, and then do the same thing. Top, bottom, left, and right constraints. Except for this time, we actually don't have to do top constraint because we already created a constraint between those two objects when we added the bottom constraint to the text view. That said, if you do happen to have a constraint on both, it's not the end of the world, it'll still work. But I'm going to skip it for now and then hit Add 3 Constraints. So notice that those red outlines along the toolbar here are now changed to blue. So we've successfully created auto layout constraints, and they're red when you have constraints that don't match up. So once you start using those constraints, you need to use them for every object on your screen. And so when you only use them for one object and not others, then the ones that aren't using them are going to have red outlines saying that you need to apply constraints to those items. So with those two simple changes, watch what happens when we go to a smaller device. I'm going to view this as an iPhone 4S, and you'll notice that it hugs the edges of the screen, and the toolbar hugs the bottom of the screen. So that's all we had to do to support all kinds of different device sizes and aspect ratios. By using auto layout constraints, you can organize the layout of your application so it will display how you want on multiple devices.